Rob Manfred dropped a bomb during the Little League Classic broadcast between the Mets and the Mariners the other night and said that he could see expansion and realignment in the near future. Now, expansion has been a talk in baseball for a while. Okay, there's been talk of going to 32 teams, probably Nashville adding a team, but that could be a little bit tricky because Nashville is between the Braves and the Cardinals markets, which are two gigantic markets for professional baseball, for those who don't know. So maybe in the Carolinas too, and then also Portland. So you could have like Portland, the Carolinas, Nashville, something like that. But he talked about adding those two new teams. Then he discussed geographical realignment, where they lay out the divisions, all 32 teams based on geography, not based on AL, NL, or anything like that. Now, the world is upset with this. People are upset with Rob Manfred for floating geographical realignment for divisions if there's a 32-team league instead of AL/NL because they believe it's more evidence of Rob Manfred killing tradition. What they're missing on that point is that the tradition literally related to AL and NL died long before Rob Manfred ever became MLB commissioner, and there was no point to hold on to it. Okay, before Rob Manfred ever became commissioner, interleague play had already been introduced. There were no longer different commissioners for each league, and there were no longer separate umpiring crews. That all happened in 97, 98, and 99, respectively. Okay? Yes, Rob Manfred did do the interleague play year-round and adopted the universal designated hitter rule. But if you really care about fair play, you have to do those two things. You can't do a 16 teams in one league and 14 in another when you have a playoff and everybody's competing to make the playoff. That's just not fair. So you had to do that. Just fair play has to count for something. And the same with the universal DH rule, because it reflects how teams are going to construct their rosters year to year. So I don't really have a problem with either of those. And for the record, for those who don't know, there was a universal DH rule before 1973 as well, where neither team had a DH. So don't act like AL having DH and NL not having DH was somehow tradition and that Rob Manfred got rid of it by having universal DH rule, because there was a universal no DH rule before 1973. So the whole AL NL separation and tradition died well before Rob Manfred took over. So there was no reason to stick to it. He's right at this point that since you're not going to stick to it, the pressure between based on the amount of games teams play, geographical realignment makes way more sense. So you don't have as much wear and tear on your body as you're traveling all over the place. I don't think that's that crazy. I think Rob Manfred's absolutely right to want to do something like that. Now, the pressure is going to be this. They are going to try, for travel reasons, to have state and traditional rivals both be kept. Not all of that would work. You just can't do it where you keep state and traditional rivals. State rivals would be interstate, like Pittsburgh and Philly. There's some regional rivals there, Kansas City and St. Louis. You guys get the picture. Chicago and Chicago, the White Sox and Cubs, the Yankees and Mets, all of that. You can't preserve all of those and all of the traditional rivalries that matter the most in baseball, not just Yankees, Red Sox, but we're talking White Sox and Tigers, Cubs and Cardinals. Given what you're trying to do here, you can't preserve all of those at the same time. What you can do, though, that might be a little controversial, is this. You can have that interstate rivalry we're talking about still be in different leagues, but you play them as much as you play division teams. So here's what I would do. Stick with the NL-AL format, but just move around some teams. I don't know exactly how you do it. It depends on who you add, whether or not you add a team for Portland, Nashville, or the Carolinas. But move around a couple of teams. A couple of newer teams, by the way. Don't move around any of the original Charter 15. Charter 16. When I talk about the Charter 16, I'm talking about the original 16 teams in the major leagues that existed from 1901 until the league's first expansion in 1963. Okay? Keep them and their traditions. Move around teams like the Rockies, the Diamondbacks that have less ties to a division or a league. Do what you have to do, and then set the divisions, set the geographic divisions and the realignment based on how close teams are at that point. I wouldn't worry as much. Now, you would say, oh, they already do that with the leagues. Not as much as I would do it. I would move around teams to make it a little better if I can. And then I would change the scheduling format. Here's how I would do it. Give every team that one interleague rival that they have, which is, for instance, the Nationals and the Orioles facing each other, I guess you would say, or the Yankees and the Mets, what we just talked about. Increase the number of games those two teams play each other. Treat them like divisional games. Have them play each other a certain number of games, almost as much as they play a divisional series. And if you do that, then you will limit the travel of those teams. And at that point, I think you have a really good thing going. I would just stick with the 3-game series for every game across the board. You do 4 teams in a division. And the way I would do it is you play every team in your division with 2 3-game series at home, 2 3-game series on the road, which, if you're doing the math, that is 36 divisional games. You play your closest interleague rival, again, just like you play divisional games, which would mean 12 games against one other team from the other league. That's 48 games right there. And then you just play home and home with the rest of your league, AL or NL, at 72 games. And then 1 3-game series, whether it be home or home, with the rest of the league at 42 games on the other side. Now, if you really want to stick with it, I get it, geographical realignment. Then at that point, I probably would understand going with, because of the rest of the league, the 72 games would be the rest of the games you play against teams in your league. Geographical realignment would make a little more sense then and would be a little bit more fair. There's ways you can do it, but I think it's going to be a lot more difficult to pull off than Rob Manfred thinks, and not just because of the tradition rules that everybody's complaining about. I don't really care about tradition, guys. I did for a while. I wish there was tradition. I think that was one of the best things about baseball, and I fear it's going the way of NASCAR, for instance, where they de-individualize the sport of NASCAR. But I think the big problem with baseball, for those worried about the AL versus NL separation, that breakup happened long before Rob Manfred took over as baseball commissioner. And interleague play, again, was the only dramatic change he made that broke tradition. Not even the DH rule, because like I said, the 1 DH rule, universal, that also existed back in the day before 1973. And that was when that was when neither league could have the DH. So you can't say Rob Manfred got rid of tradition by having a universal allowance of designated hitters instead of just having the ALB DH and the NLB non-DH, given the fact that there was a universal, that's a tradition that only goes back to 73. So there was more time when baseball didn't have that when it did. And interleague play did begin under Bud Selig. So again, all the dismantling of the AL-NL separation happened before Rob Manfred. There's no tradition of that anymore. For big historians like me who did like the idea that baseball was about chasing your pennant and then the World Series was icing on the cake, that thought concept of baseball died a long time ago, and I just have to accept that it's never coming back. Doesn't mean that there aren't better ways to preserve rivalry specifically, and I think you need to do that. Like I said, Cardinals Cubs cannot go anywhere. Yankees Red Sox, obviously that speaks for itself. White Sox Tigers, things like that. But I don't think there's anything you can do about trying to preserve the sanctity of the whole AL-NL split. That should not be a deterrent for Rob Manfred doing a geographic realignment.